We made it to module 3. I wanted to post this quick video to give you a review so that you can be full force going into test 1, the midterm that's posted. And so I wanted to recap some of the main concepts from module 1, 2, and 3 from this lecture. So let's go. Module 1, some of the important things. We talked about tourism as an export earner, right? And some of you guys were very confused, and we cleared all of this up on the chat. So again, tourism is an export when people from abroad are coming into our country spending money that they made somewhere else, right? In that sense, we make money. That's how tourism is also tied to the GDP. So hint, hint, that is one of the questions on your test, right? So the GDP is a gross domestic product of a country. Right now, in most countries, tourism is somewhere 10 to 11% of the GDP. So that's quite a chunk of money, right, for countries that is coming from tourism. You can imagine smaller countries, it's even more, right? And so when something like COVID happens, like now in tourism is a standstill, it's devastating, okay? So remember, GDP, gross domestic product, it is how countries make money through tourism. Another thing from module 1 is the tourism organization. So we talked about how tourism is organized from international, national, regional, as well as municipal organizations, right? Some of the big international organizations we talked about is the WTTC. Remember, that was by invitation only. It was the World Travel and Tourism Council, which is basically CEOs of the main companies. As opposed to that, the other big international tourism organization is the United Nations World Tourism Organization, which is, the membership is consisting of countries, right? So it's a country, and it's looking at how can we use tourism as a tool for good, how can we use tourism to alleviate poverty, to be more sustainable, and so on. That's also where the SDGs that I'm sure you guys have heard about are coming in, right? The 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In terms of, for example, hint, hint, another question on the test, a local organization, a local CVB, which is a Convention and Visitors Bureau, would be an example of a local tourism organization, right? So here in Miami, that's the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau, which for us markets, right? They know all of the markets of who's coming in, who's spending how much money where. They're helping organize tourism and selling Miami all across the world, right? So that's it for module 1. Just remember your organizations, remember the GDP. In terms of how tourism is marketed as well, one of the questions is, does the US have a national tourism campaign? It usually did not. Obama was the first president actually that created a national tourism company called Brand USA. You guys can check it out. And in module 1, I posted a couple of videos and texts about the Brand USA campaign and what they do. So that is our national tourism organization that helps market the US as a tourism destination across the world. Module 2 talked about basically the history of tourism and globalization, right? And how globalization and tourism are linked. So just look at stagecoach travel and air travel and some of the early travel agents, and you guys did really great on that, so I don't really foresee anything. Some of the other things to mention was the Grand Tour, which I think is one of the coolest concepts in that lecture, because it was really the first study abroad, right? So that was British aristocrats going overseas for up to 3 or 4 years. Can you imagine going on a study abroad for 3 or 4 years, right? And so they went from England over the channel, right, to France. They spent time in Germany, they spent time in Italy, they spent time in the Netherlands, and they learned the local language, they learned local culture, customs, right? And got to know people. And so that was really the first study abroad of helping them become better citizens, more connected, more educated. And when you think about how tourism is set up now, well, that's basically how the tour still goes, right? Tourism companies still do this Grand Tour that was done hundreds of years ago, so that's pretty cool. Okay, module 3 has a couple of big concepts that I want you guys to know about. So the first one is extremities. That's such a funny concept, but that's how they call it. Extremities of international tourism. Really all that means is how tourism changed from when it first came out to now in terms of international travel, right? So some of the extremities are dependency to autonomy. What does that mean? It has to do with how we book travel. Imagine in the 1960s, 70s, when international tourism first came out, people were really relying heavily on travel agents to book their international flights, their hotels, their stays, right? They didn't have internet to go to. Now, who has ever used a travel agent anymore? We don't use travel agents anymore. We book all of our international travel autonomously online. So that's why that dependency to autonomy, right? The other one is from relaxation, which was before, to activity now. So when internationally travelers first started traveling, they think about like the sun and sand tourism, right? Somebody in the Caribbean just going to lay down in a resort. And now that's not the case anymore. People go, but they don't want to just lay in the sand and get a tan. They want to experience the culture, go on a zip line tour. They want to maybe volunteer, do a cooking class. It's more active and more engaged. So we've seen that trend in international tourism as well, right? And then the other one is familiarity to novelty. So when we first started traveling internationally, people wanted to feel comfortable. They wanted to see things that are familiar, maybe stay in resorts, fly with airlines that they know. And now it's more about, I want to go see the culture there. I want to use, local transportation. I want to see and do new things. So that has also changed. Travelers are becoming more sophisticated in that sense, right? Some of the other things in Module 2 is likelihood to travel. So think about it. Some of the main things are higher income. Well, that's an obvious one, right? The more money you have, the more discretionary income you have, the more you have, obviously, the freedom monetarily to travel. So that, through studies, we've seen that correlation quite often, that as we have more spending money, we travel more. The same goes for education. So you all, for example, are actually going to be way more likely to travel than a high school graduate. So as your education level goes up, you're more likely to travel. Same goes with living in a city. Now, why is that? It could be because people who are more educated or make more money live in the city, or because we have more connections, more international influences, right? But if you live in a city, you're more likely to travel than if you live rurally. It could also be that if you live rural, you have a lot longer to go to an airport and that kind of thing, right? So living in a city, having more income, more education, all lead you to travel more. Family life cycle is another one. So if you have small kids, you can imagine that it's kind of hard to travel, especially internationally, right? However, as you get older, you don't have kids or you have older kids, you're more likely to travel than families with younger kids. And now to the crux of Module 3. So Module 3 looks at the sociology of tourism, of what happens when two groups of people meet. Now, this really happens in mass tourism, right? So I want you guys to know that everything we talk about in terms of these impacts, these effects on tourism, is really how we develop tourism. That it doesn't have to be negative as we talk about in this module. It's how we develop it. What I want you guys to see is that this kind of boom and bust mass tourism, as we've seen it develop until COVID hit, that was really what led to some of those negative impacts. Now we have the chance to redo that and redevelop tourism, and we're already seeing a lot of those projects all around the world, and if you take the sustainable tourism class, you'll learn a lot more about that. So some of the things, impacts on culture, right? Some of you guys asked me, well, isn't tourism always good? Well, yes, when we first started developing tourism was seen as this smokeless industry, this industry without any negative impacts, right? That was just creating good. However, now as we look at 40 years in the making, and when you guys watch the Gringo Trails movie, you really see some of what has been going on. We now look back on 40, 50 years of international tourism, and we see, wow, there has been some pretty devastating impacts. So culturally speaking, what's going on? One of the things, for example, is resentment. When tourists come with clothes and gadgets and jewelry that locals don't have, locals can feel resentment, right? Also maybe how tourists behave or how they dress, that might be different. It can lead to resentment. Tourism can also lead to a loss of culture. So think about it again, when masses meet, right, and tourists bring their own style of clothing or their own style of music, the local culture can get lost in that and just adapt or take over the culture of the tourists, right? What can also happen is a loss of authenticity. So that could mean that the way we used to do things, the way we used to dance, the way we used to do our artwork, the way we used to do our cooking, right, changed because we're adapting to what the tourists want. So that is one. And related to that could also be staged authenticity. We're still doing it, but we're pretending it's authentic, even though it's not. We're really doing it for the tourists. And the example I gave you guys in the lecture in Module 3 is the typical Hawaiian luau, right? That's done on a 3 o'clock and Wednesday afternoon in front of the Marriott, right? Well, that's very staged. That's not an authentic luau that's done, right? Just for the sake of having a luau. So I hope that helps you guys. Some of the other things is standardizations, right? So standardization has to do with everything becoming the same. So you see the same chains, the same food, even jobs, right? So job roles, think about a tourism, a waiter, a buzzer, right? That's kind of a standardized job. So somebody who used to work in the field, go fishing, they were doing different things. Now it's a standardized job. So standardization is another thing that's negative that has come with tourism, right? Even jobs, think about it. So yes, we say tourism grades jobs, but it's a low paying standardized job, maybe even seasonal because the tourism season shuts down, right? And so we need to start thinking more about what's actually going on and what's really happening there. I hope this helps you guys. You guys will do great, and I'll see you in Module 4. Ciao.